Hey community of awesome, I'm Gabe and this is Bookish Pixie. So way back during the first Ask Me Anything I did, someone asked me about the very first book that I wrote. And while I did share the very first page of that book in a vlog, which you are free to look at, I will link it to that below, and still a little embarrassed about that vlog to be honest, but I haven't really talked about it otherwise. So let's talk about my very first manuscript. I started what would be my first book literally half a lifetime ago. I was 13. And I didn't really know what I was doing. I mean, I read a lot of books, but I primarily read adult books, and I wanted to write a book that was featuring a protagonist who was my age at the time, which meant a teenager. So it was a young adult book that I was writing, but I didn't really read young adult. And since I didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't really do much self-teaching before I started writing or research of any kind, I put in just about every fantasy cliche you can think of in this book. So it was a young adult fantasy, and it started off, like the first words were a prophecy. Yeah, and then it opened with a prologue, because of course it did, and the prologue featured the antagonist doing something really evil, because what else would he be doing? And there was literal maniacal laughter. It was pretty bad. Of course, the two protagonists were the ones who were prophesied about, and they were twins who were separated at birth, and one of them was raised by the evil people, and there were magical horses, because why not? And it was based off like medievalism, so very Western fantasy with swords and knights and all that, and it was also pretty much a biblical analogy that was really obvious, like Narnia-esque obvious. So yeah, it was a lot. In hindsight, I don't really have very many good things to say about it, except that it was a really good learning experience for me. I think I was about 15 or so when I queried that book, because I did actually query it, and the query letter I used for it was very embarrassing. It was more than a page long, which you don't do. I talked about myself way more than I talked about the book. There was a lot of weird extra info that really just didn't need to be there. It was bad, and that's staying in the vault forever. However, I did share it with my patrons over on Patreon. They're the only people who will ever see that query letter ever, so if you're curious, you can check out my Patreon. But otherwise, yeah, that's staying in the drawer, and that's not coming out. It's bad. From there, I wrote 8 other manuscripts before I wrote Beyond the Red. A lot of sci-fi and fantasy mixed in there. It was a really long period of writing books, querying, failing, putting away. Writing books, querying, failing, putting them away. And I didn't query every single book that I wrote. Some of them I put immediately in the drawer. But I needed that experience of writing books over and over again. And it gave me the time that I needed to research the industry and learn more about how to write a book, both through writing books and through reading craft books about writing. And it was a really long period, like I want to say it was somewhere around 10 years from my very first book to when I got an agent or when I got published. Somewhere around there. It was a very long time, but I needed that time. I learned so much in those years, and that was when I really grew as a writer and became prepared to eventually become published. But will I ever be taking that book out of the trunk? Absolutely not. That is staying put away literally forever. I'm 100% sure about this. Yeah, I just have no desire to go back and fix it and publish it or anything like that. I want to move on to other books. I've got a lot of other stories I want to write. I have other characters I want to write, and you know, it was what I needed to start writing, and I'm grateful for that, but that's staying put away. So yeah, that's all you really need to know about my first book. I think the main takeaway I want you guys to have is it's okay if your writing starts off bad. That's normal, and it's part of the process that we all need to go through. And I think it's essential to go through the experience of writing a book and then learning from that experience and then being able to apply that to the next project, and so on and so forth, continuously forever, so that we continue learning and continue becoming better writers. So that's what I got for today. If you liked what you saw, don't forget to subscribe and comment, and I'll see you guys next week.